Welcome to the Italian Renaissance podcast, where we discuss the culture and art of 15th and 16th century Italy. I'm your host, Lawrence Gianangeli. Andiamo avanti. Renaissance, people. Welcome back to the Italian Renaissance podcast. I'm very excited to continue our conversation about the courts of Renaissance Italy. We did quite a run of episodes on Lorenzo the Magnificent and of the Medici court in Florence. For this next batch of episodes, we're going to move through some of the other prominent courts of Italy. It's not all about Florence. We've done a comprehensive look already at Venice, so our main goal is to be treating the northern territories other than Venice and the very exciting histories of the families who ruled them, starting with what eventually becomes the Duchy of Ferrara, ruled by the Este family. We may also refer to this as Este Ferrara. Este is the last name, kind of like Medici. It refers to a place. So when we talk about Este Ferrara, like the Republic of Florence, we are not talking about only the territory that is the modern city of Ferrara today, but the larger scope of the realm led by the families in question. By the end of the 15th century, the Este had control of not only Ferrara, but also Reggio and Modena, and the towns and lands that connected them. That puts them on a border, mainly with Mantua, Bologna, the Republic of Venice, and the Duchy of Milan. Northern Italy, guys. Are we here? Before we get to the Renaissance, the heart of the Renaissance in Ferrara, particularly the reign of Leonello d'Este, the family has a long medieval history of wealth, of power, of political prestige. The Este are originally of Frankish or Lombard origin. They took their name from the town of Este near Padua. By the 10th and the 11th centuries, they had become prominent feudal lords within the Holy Roman Empire. That's how these city-states worked. They were essentially vassal states to either the emperor or the pope or whatever major power was of concern, the empire or the pope. That's what we're talking about. Around the 12th century is when the Este dynasty split into two major branches. The elder German line became deeply entwined with the imperial politics and eventually ruled Bavaria and Brunswick. The younger, that's who we're talking about, the focus of Este Ferrara, is the Italian branch, led by Azzo VI and his successors, who remained in northern Italy and pursued control over key cities like Ferrara. So the Este that we know are the Italian branch. We're talking 1242. Azzo VII d'Este established control over Ferrara, taking advantage of factional strife between Guelphs and Ghibellines, that very famous history that is usually told through Dante and the Florentine perspective, but is central to the rise of Este power. So backed by the papacy, the Este secured their place as lords of Ferrara. Over the next century is when they extended their influence to include Modena and Reggio Emilia, gradually consolidating a territorial state under Este rule. Although nominally subjected to the papacy and empire in this period, the Este operated with some degree of relative autonomy, often through careful diplomacy and complicated shifting allegiances, which is always the most difficult thing for me as an art historian to sort out, are all the different ways that these powers make alliances, break alliances, go to war, support each other, betray each other. It's all history. By the late 14th century, so now we're getting to Proto-Renaissance period, the end of the Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages in Italy, Niccolò III d'Este had emerged as the dominant figure of the Este family and Lord of Ferrara. Though Niccolò was born illegitimate, he was later legitimized by the Pope and ruled Ferrara from, this is a long reign, 1393 to 1441. We're talking a nearly 5-decade reign of a single man marked by, we would say, political pragmatism, martial alliances, and the beginnings of, you ready for this, guys, humanist patronage in Ferrara. You know all about humanist patronage if you've made it this far. It was Niccolò who established Ferrara as a central court of learning and invited scholars and artists to his court. It's Ferrara that the Byzantine entourage passed through, and we'll talk about that. Niccolò was also quite the romantic, and I did a whole Patreon exclusive podcast, the sort of supplementary extra information I give on these for the people who support the show. I did a Patreon exclusive on his wives, and specifically Parisina Malatesta. So having three wives over his lifetime and even more lovers, right? Side chicks. Um, Niccolò's children rank in the double digits, and a great of many of them were not from his wives. So, in fact, his first heir, Ugo, was illegitimate. Ugo met the untimely decapitation when he began a love affair with Niccolò's second wife, Parisina Malatesta, who was also beheaded under the orders of Niccolò. So there's a lot of history and drama around his his wives and his children. But I'm more concerned with his actual heir. When Niccolò died in 1441, and Ugo would have been executed over a decade before Niccolò died, Niccolò had groomed another of his children as heir. Power passed to his eldest illegitimate son, Leonello d'Este, who had been carefully educated by a renowned humanist named Guarino da Verona. Guarino was a scholar of ancient Greek, and he actually studied it in Constantinople when it was still the Byzantine Empire as a pupil under Manuel Chrysolaris, that is the famed Byzantine scholar who served as a professor in Italy through the beginning of the 15th century and was critical in the revival of ancient Greek language and learning in Renaissance Italy. Okay, but Guarino studied with him in Constantinople. So that very year, the year of Niccolò's death in 1441, we see a keen interest in the commissioning of artworks. In Ferrara, we do not necessarily see the jump towards critical innovation like we see in Florence. Florence is starting to say, we need to do this differently. We're going to create processes of art techniques. That's not really happening here. Rather, we see the triumph of the Gothic style continue and expand, or in this case, we call it international Gothic style. That's one that blends the early phases of classical humanistic revival with French Gothic motifs, detailed landscapes, and the much adored Netherlandish style of painting is all getting combined into one style. The artist, the most prominent international Gothic artist that we've talked about is Gentile da Fabriano. So in 1441, Niccolò, the same year of his death, before he died, called a competition between Jacopo Bellini and Pisanello. You might recall Jacopo was one of the most influential artists from Venice who founded the Bellini workshop, that is, of Giovanni Bellini and Gentile Bellini, the great Renaissance Venetian painters that ushered in Titian. And Pisanello was coming from probably Verona. So he's calling artists to his court. They were set against one another to paint a portrait, of which Niccolò's son Leonello was the model. Sources indicate actually that Jacopo Bellini won that competition, but his victory portrait does not survive. We do have what is widely considered to be Pisanello's entry in that competition, the portrait of Leonello d'Este, which is now in Bergamo. Um, it's a regal figure in profile that is no doubt it's Leonello. That we can verify because it looks like all of his other portraits, and resembles the amazing medallions that Pisanello would subsequently make under Leonello's direct patronage. So there's this direct link between this portrait contest and Leonello's patronage of Renaissance medallions being interwoven with this budding revival of classical antiquity and having a keen fascination with artistic patronage and being humanistically trained, Leonello's succession in 1441 marked a turning point in Renaissance Ferrara. Cultured, eloquent, deeply engaged in these humanistic ideals, Leonello would usher in the golden age for Ferrara. That's what we're talking about, folks. One that was emblematic of Renaissance court culture in Italy. Usually we say there's like Florence and then the rest, but it's this ideal golden age of court culture, high aristocratic culture. Leonello's reign was somewhat brief, so only 9 years, from 1441 to 1450. A lot can happen in 9 years. Before he took control, he was married to Margherita Gonzaga. That's a noble woman that united the houses of Ferrara, Este Ferrara, with Gonzaga's Mantova. The Este Gonzaga link happens in this marriage. However, Margherita died in 1439 before Leonello takes over, so he unified with the House of Aragon, marrying Mary of Aragon, the daughter of Alfonso V, who was the King of Naples, the Kingdom of Naples, which is a vassal of Spain. So Leonello is crafting a political identity and trying to create Ferrara as a stronghold of political alliances. He is now wed to the daughter of one of the most powerful kings in Italy.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Renaissance people, if you are enjoying the Italian Renaissance podcast, I have good news. We're now active on Patreon. You can show your love for the show by becoming a patron and get access to additional resources, information, and artworks. Better yet, those who join the Renaissance Master or Renaissance Patron tier will get access to at least one additional podcast episode each month. My goal is to ensure that the main podcast remains a free, accessible source for everyone. Become a patron today through the link in the show notes to support the continued production of new episodes and help build and maintain this community. The Italian Renaissance shop is now also active on Etsy, linked in the show notes. Sport our logo or choose from a growing selection of Italian art-inspired designs. Discounts are offered to select Patreon tiers as well. Your support has my immortal gratitude. Now, enjoy the show.
It's also in this period that Leonello commissions Leon Battista Alberti. We know Alberti very well. He was an active court member at Ferrara as well as Florence. And Alberti for Leonello wrote the very first theoretical treatise on architecture since antiquity, De Re Edifactoria, in 1443. Alberti's famous treatise of architecture. He wrote that under the commission of Leonello d'Este, only 2 years into his reign. Leonello was very concentrated on these types of commissions, including, of course, artworks, with a particular focus on the small types of artworks. We already mentioned Pisanello's crafting of the portrait medallion style. Pisanello invents that. We know, well, as a revival of antiquity, it's the Renaissance medallion is a type of invented artwork. We know the very first of the Renaissance medallions was by Pisanello of the Byzantine Emperor John VIII Paleologus, who came to Italy for the Council of Ferrara, which was moved to Florence, and that happened in 1438. It's unknown if Niccolò III or Leonello, because we're talking 1438, commissioned the John VIII medallion. However, in the subsequent years, Pisanello would serve as the artist of Leonello's portrait medallions, among others of the court of Ferrara and beyond. These medallions have a portrait on the obverse. The obverse is the front, and on the reverse, the backside, some kind of scene or another. In the case of Leonello's Ferrara, the portrait would be paired with a complicated allegory on the reverse. The most well-known example, and I had the pleasure of visiting this medallion in the Palazzo Schifanoia in Ferrara earlier this year, is the medal of Leonello. So his portrait on the front and on the back is an allegory showing winged Eros taming a lion by showing him a sheet of music. We don't have time to go over how complicated of an allegory that is, nor, frankly, do I think I could successfully do that. But Leonello likewise commissioned major artists like Piero della Francesca, who painted a series of battle scenes from the history of ancient Rome. Those are now lost. He also famously commissioned works from the Northern European painters. Leonello had connections in the mercantile town of Bruges in modern-day Belgium, which is a place you must visit in your lifetime because it's wonderful. There were Este agents in Bruges, so he had connections, and he really liked the northern style of painting. So he commissioned several works from the very famous Netherlandish or what do we call them? Northern Renaissance painter Roger van der Weyden. And there are records of artworks that are no longer known today, also by the hand of the Italian Andrea Mantegna, commissioned by Leonello. So we're talking Piero della Francesca, Roger van der Weyden, Mantegna, Pisanello. He's an active patron of artworks. And among Leonello's more important contributions to the Ferrarese landscape were the sculptural additions to the Palazzo Municipale, the municipal palace, the government palace directly across from the cathedral in Ferrara. From the palace is a large entryway called the Volto del Cavallo, facade of the horse, and today is flanked by two bronze statues, this sort of archway. The first of these bronze statues, the original, was erected by Leonello in honor of his father Niccolò III, and it was an equestrian statue in the likes of the known ancient Roman models, like the statue of Emperor Marcus Aurelius in Rome. This sculpture of Niccolò III was a joint effort. The rider was sculpted by an artist named Antonio di Cristoforo, Florentine, and the horse was a work by another Florentine sculptor who was actually likely trained under Brunelleschi, Niccolò Baroncelli. Indeed, after this sculpture, Niccolò Baroncelli became known as Niccolò del Cavallo, Niccolò of the horse, referring to this sculpture and maybe the Volto del Cavallo for which it was sculpted. As important as the statue itself, it was placed upon a monumental pedestal, likely designed by Alberti himself. Unfortunately, when Napoleon took possession of Ferrara in 1796, the original bronze was melted down. So this masterpiece of Leonello's patronage was melted down by Napoleon or his generals. Bastards. However, Alberti's pedestal is still there, along with a somewhat faithful copy of the original sculpture, which was remade in the 20th century based on old drawings that depicted what the sculpture originally looked like. So what's there? The sculpture there in Ferrara now is a 20th century copy. The strange pedestal is an Alberti design. And what's of absolute significance here in this whole monument is this is the first monumental equestrian sculpture of the Renaissance. If you recall my discussion of Donatello and his equestrian statue of Gatta Melata, I said that was the first monumental equestrian, leaving out that it is indeed not the very first ever done, but the earliest one that still exists. So I wanted to clarify that. When I was talking about the Gattamelata sculpture, it's the earliest surviving one, but Niccolò del Cavallo's monument of Niccolò III is the first monumental equestrian sculpture of the Renaissance, and that happened in Ferrara by Florentine sculptors. Okay, so it's the very first since antiquity in the ancient Roman style of Niccolò III, commissioned by Leonello d'Este. And the pedestal is still the original. And it is the pedestal that's of particular importance. It is an example of Alberti's classicizing of the architectural landscape in Italy. It appears like a small version of a Roman triumphal arch, some of the most enduring monuments of ancient Rome, like the Arch of Constantine, but also is sort of a strange artistic choice for the front of a building, especially as the pedestal to a sculpture. And it actually does not go flush against the building. It's perpendicular to it, so it juts out. It's a very strange choice. However, with this commission, we see that Leonello used his humanistic training to directly bring the visual world of Rome to Ferrara, because Ferrara does not have Roman ruins, right? It doesn't have those things. Fashioning his father in the likes of Marcus Aurelius, a wise philosopher emperor, not a man of opulence, not a man of glitz and glamour. And it's the other monument, flanking the Volto del Cavallo, because the Volto is sort of the arch. On one side, you have the equestrian monument in this pedestal, and on the other, it's going to, looking at this monument will allow us to pivot to the next phase of Este dominion. That is the monument to Borso d'Este, Leonello's half-brother via Niccolò III. So this is all still Niccolò's son, his other son. Borso came to take over after the sudden death of Leonello in 1450. Leonello was only 43, and we don't know how he died, but he died. Boom, dead, gone. Borso takes over. Unlike Leonello, Borso d'Este was not a scholar. He wasn't really a humanist, even though he was definitely interested in patronage. He was a shrewd political operator and an ambitious ruler, and he was determined to elevate Ferrara's prestige on the Italian stage. After assuming power in 1450, Borso worked tirelessly to secure legitimacy, first as the Marquis of Ferrara from the Emperor, and eventually as Duke of Modena and Reggio in 1452. In 1471, after years of negotiating lavish diplomacy, Pope Paul II granted him the coveted title of Duke of Ferrara, which transformed the Este lordship into a full sovereign duchy. This happens under Borso. That's very important. Okay, this is the same time that Lorenzo the Magnificent is rising up in the 1470s, right? That is not to say that Borso did not have an eye for the arts, particularly their potential to enhance his political esteem. In 1453, he commissioned a bronze statue of himself. We're back to the Volto del Cavallo, a bold act of self-fashioning, rare for a living ruler. So sculpted again by Niccolò Baroncelli, Niccolò del Cavallo, the later refined, and then it was later refined and completed by Giovanni Baroncelli and Domenico di Paris. Other sculptors, they finished it for Baroncelli, and it was inaugurated in 1454. Unlike his father Niccolò III's dynamic equestrian sculpture in the style of Marcus Aurelius, Borso's seated figure projects power and majesty. A ruler not in motion and not on horseback, but already enthroned and sovereign. Now, it's worth mentioning that this statue was not originally placed here at the Volto del Cavallo, but it was moved there after Borso died in 1471. The column has a very particular history like the first one, but a little bit more ugly, let's say. Now, the original column was made of marbles from Istria and Verona, but it was damaged in a fire in 1716. That damn 18th century has been harsh to these monuments. In an unsavory turn of events, they used tombstones from the Jewish cemetery to restore the damage to the column. When they decided to do another restoration in 1960, the headstones were able to be confirmed, reportedly, but were maintained in the structure of the city. The headstones were confirmed to have come from the Jewish cemetery, but the city of Ferrara would not give them back to the Jewish community and instead permanently fixed them to the column during the restorations. So the column of the sculpture to Borso d'Este is indeed restored with looted or stolen headstones from the Jewish cemetery in the 18th century, and that they were permanently added in 1960. Sorry, it's kind of horrible, but that's the reality. And that was an important aside, but it's not necessarily to our understanding of the Renaissance history. So we have Duke Borso as a ruler, enthroned, which is a very different kind of self-fashioning than we saw from Leonello. Although the ceaseless shifting of alliances in Renaissance Italy is almost never fixed, we know the Este were often aligned with the Venetians. So, on that remarkable day when Cosimo de' Medici died in 1464, a plan was hatched to remove Medici influence in Italy by eliminating Piero de' Medici, the heir of the Medici dynasty, by a group of anti-Medicean aristocrats in Florence. That Piero is Piero the Gouty. That's Lorenzo the Magnificent's father. Borso, as a major political and military force on the Italian peninsula, was brought into this plan to get rid of the Medici. The attack was not initiated until 1466, 2 years later, which was accompanied by Ferrarese troops provided by Borso and led by Borso's brother Ercole d'Este, that is also the future Duke of Ferrara. Ultimately, the plan was foiled when Piero was warned, and the young Lorenzo actually discovered the trap set for Piero upon the road and was able to avoid it being sprung and the death of his father. Big drama. So we see Borso as having a hand in the flow and distribution of power as Lord of Ferrara. He was also a vibrant patron and he invested heavily in the commissioning of art and architecture. He added to the many family palaces that he owned, and he also commissioned one of the most ostentatious illuminated manuscripts of the whole Renaissance, so-called Bible of Borso d'Este. We're not really going to get into that too much. It's just important to bookmark the importance of manuscript illumination in Borso's court. We are going to continue this conversation in the next episode, though, because I want to talk about Borso as a patron of painting, because he is really going to fundamentally change the landscape of Ferrarese painting. And we're going to look at specifics of some of the artworks that are produced, and then we are going to explore the reign of his successor, Ercole I. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been really fun to get into, and I'm excited to go into the patronage of Borso d'Este and Ercole in the next episode. Until then, arrivederci.